Joe Flacco is officially the Browns starting quarterback for week 1. Now what? We'll talk about it coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Dog Pound? I'm Spencer German, your host of the Locked On Browns podcast. I'm proudly covering your Cleveland Browns each and every single day. In the land and on the road, the worst kept secret in Cleveland is now public. Joe Flacco will be the Browns starting quarterback week 1. Speaking of starters, it's time to unveil my latest Browns 53-man roster projection. Starting with the offense, will they keep 4 quarterbacks? I'll tell you. Plus, we go to the defensive side with some interesting options on the menu, specifically in the secondary. First, though, I do want to thank you for being on every day at the Locked On Browns podcast, making us your first listen every single day. Remember, you can find Cleveland Browns content with Locked On Browns every week, Monday through Friday, guaranteed, with bonus content on some weekends as well, and it's totally free to you. Just hit that subscribe button wherever it is that you get your podcasts, and of course, at the Locked On Browns YouTube channel. You can also get involved in the show by sharing your thoughts on anything we discussed today in the comments section. This is your team, so be part of the conversation every single day. And today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. All right, we all knew it was coming, but now it's official. Joe Flacco will be the Browns starting quarterback week 1 of the season. The team announced it on Monday via their own sort of press release and made it official. Now, this isn't all that surprising. Flacco has been taking the first team reps throughout most of camp. We know that. He's taken the majority of those. Flacco has also been, I don't even want to say the most consistent, because I do think Shedeur Sanders has been the most consistent of the quarterbacks. But I think that Joe Flacco has been the most, like, you know, when he needs to have a good day, or when there was a good day to be had, it was normally him who was making the big time throws, moving the offense up and down the field. And I think no day defined that more than what we saw on day 2 against the Philadelphia Eagles first team defense, where he was slicing and dicing his way to the end zone and just making all the big time throws. Like, nobody made those major, like the head turning throws and the ones that made you go, ooh, there's still something there. Or that's an NFL level throw more than Joe Flacco did. And so it's not all that surprising that he wins this job. He also kind of had a first round bye in the quarterback competition regardless. Didn't really do much during minicamp. Didn't really do much at the start of training camp. They were just kind of holding him out while the other guys got acclimated, learned the playbook, all these different things, because they knew what to expect from Joe. And I had talked about that at length. The idea that, yeah, you know, Joe Flacco is Joe Flacco. He's run this offense before. He knows the system. He was here before. He's comfortable in it. All those things apply. And so you didn't need to see a ton from him early on in this process. He also is the only quarterback in this group that didn't end up getting hurt in some capacity. And so that obviously helped his cause as well, because I do think the team believed that Kenny Pickett would be more of a challenge to him. This is not how I always envisioned this going. Like, for a team trying to win now, like I could have seen it going different ways. I think there was a stretch of time, speaking of Kenny Pickett and the team's love for him, there was a stretch of time where I felt Kenny Pickett maybe did have the organization's belief, and they thought he would win the job. And I think he started training camp pretty strong, where it was like, okay, maybe we are going to have a competition on our hands. And then it all obviously dissolved pretty quickly once he dealt with this hamstring issue. I still have my doubts about Kenny Pickett. I've had my doubts about Kenny Pickett from the beginning, but he didn't get a fair shake because the injuries kept him from having that opportunity. And Joe Flacco was always kind of the safety net in this quarterback room, where, like, if all else fails, if the rookies aren't ready, or if the team felt the rookies aren't ready, and if Kenny Pickett were to get hurt like he did, or he just doesn't materialize, okay, we know that we have Joe Flacco sort of waiting in the wings as our safety net, as our safeguard. All those different things apply. And so he's the guy. And I will say this from the beginning, Flacco made sense from where this team is at as well. It's a team, as I've said a ton, is trying to win now with some veterans and players that are in the primes of their career, like a Myles Garrett, but also some guys at the tail end of their career who aren't trying to go out on a note of not trying to go out with a wasted season like Joel Bitonio, where you want a guy that can win you games now, help you compete now, while also making it pretty obvious with the way they drafted this year and the young guys that they've brought in that they are trying to pivot and lean more into a bit of a rebuild here. And so Flacco is kind of the perfect quarterback for that type of situation. You have no commitment to him after this season. It's a 1-year deal. You see what you get out of it. And then, next year you can draft your franchise quarterback if you don't think either of these rookies are the franchise quarterback. You also know you have those 2 rookies waiting in the wings to turn things over to once we get to a point in the season where maybe things aren't going in the right direction, or if they lose a lot of games early on, now all of a sudden you can pivot and go, okay, we got these rookies. Let's see what we got in these guys and sort of evaluate them the best you can before the end of the season gets here. So the only interesting thing left now from this room in terms of the quarterbacks is what this depth chart looks like behind him. And if Kenny Pickett in the week that awaits here coming up can play his way back this week into the conversation for the Browns to keep 4 quarterbacks potentially. Now, I go back and forth on this because I've said from the beginning I didn't think the Browns would keep 4 quarterbacks. Then I started to feel like they would keep 4 quarterbacks because I just don't know how they part ways with for example, with a guy in Kenny Pickett who they traded for. They traded a draft asset for him, whether it was a day 3 pick or not, and DTR. They did trade for the guy, and they gave up draft capital to get him. Are they going to be so willing just to cut him if there's not a trade partner out there? And I don't know if there's a trade partner out there. We haven't heard much about the Kenny Pickett trade front at this point. So we'll have to see. Maybe something materializes over the course of this next week or so. Maybe that's what this week is about, auditioning Kenny Pickett to go play somewhere else, and somebody can make that trade for him, and the Browns can recoup some of that draft capital that they lost in that trade. Maybe that's what they're going to sort of try to do here. I think Kevin Stefanski's comments though this week were pretty telling in terms of making it sound more like they know they can't possibly keep 4 guys, and that's a little unrealistic to potentially think is going to happen. And so if that's what's going to happen, if that's the case, then I think Kenny Pickett is the odd man out at this point. I can pretty much guarantee you the 2 rookies are going to be here. I don't see how they will part ways with those guys, 2 players that they have high hopes for, that they want to see develop more, they want to see more of. Andrew Berry isn't going to part ways with 2 guys he drafted this year over a veteran who's bounced around a number of places and you were sort of just spanking or hoping was going to be a reclamation project for you. So I think Pickett is the odd man out here. Could they keep 4 at the 53-man roster cutdown day, which we'll get into, and then maybe move 1 later or before the season starts or whatever? Sure, they did that last year. They could try to do it again, and maybe everybody will call their bluff. But I'm torn on what this sort of looks like. I think at this juncture lean that they'll keep all 4 quarterbacks, because I just don't think, even though I think the rookies are locked to me, but even though I think Kenny Pickett should be the odd man out, I also feel like we're at a place. Where you just can't. I also just feel like it would be hard to imagine the Browns actually trading, or not necessarily trading. If they're going to trade him, fine. But it's hard to imagine the Browns would just straight up cut Kenny Pickett after trading for him the way that they did this offseason. And so it's going to be an interesting situation. And so will how the depth chart sort of sits or falls behind Joe Flacco. I would imagine if they do keep Kenny Pickett, he's next in line. He's been next in line pretty much the entire time, despite dealing with the injury. I would imagine nothing really changes in that regard. I'm sure it will be Gabriel and then Shedeur Sanders after Kenny Pickett. But should it be that way? In my opinion, no. If it was up to me, it would be Flacco, Shedeur, Gabriel, and Kenny Pickett would be the odd man out. But it's going to be fascinating now to see what this last week brings in terms of that competition behind Flacco. With the number 1 quarterback spot locked up, Joe Flacco, it's his job. They've announced that. Now what happens behind him is the big revelatory thing that we still have to discover this week. As Pickett maybe gets back into the fold here, we'll see what Tuesday brings in terms of an injury update for him and whether or not he's able to get back out there. And if he is, maybe he can stick around. If not, I do wonder what that means for his future. And if it means nothing, and the Browns are going to keep all 4 of these guys past next Tuesday's deadline. That is honestly what we're going to talk about coming up next. My latest 53-man roster projections, starting with the offense. Do I have them keeping 4 quarterbacks, as we just talked about? I'll get into it coming up next on the Locked On Browns podcast. August 26th is officially FanDuel Futures Day, a brand new holiday for football fans who live for bold predictions and preseason hunches. For just 24 hours, FanDuel is giving you deals on NFL season predictions. So whether you're calling your shot with an MVP, eyeing a long shot division winner, or ready to crown your Super Bowl champ before week 1 even kicks off, this is your moment. Maybe you've got a gut feeling on an MVP candidate this year. I'm kind of feeling Joe Burrow after how he played last year. Granted, that preseason game on Monday night was not pretty for the Bengals defense, so maybe it's a stretch here. But if he drags Cincinnati to the playoffs, it could be his. Speaking of the playoffs, is this finally the year that Buffalo comes through in the AFC, or can anyone dethrone the Eagles? Place a futures bet on your favorites to win a championship. It's all available to you on August 26th. Visit the FanDuel app today and start planning your future bets now, because Futures Day is one day and one day only. FanDuel, play your game. All right, so as I did earlier before training camp started, I had a 53-man roster projection for you. I have another 53-man roster projection for you that I was working on, grinding away all day on, not all day, but for a big chunk of the day on Monday, and wanted to have some fun with trying to predict what we think this group's going to look like. And I'm not going to lie, I had some tough decisions to make at certain position groups. I've talked about whether or not the Browns are going to keep 5 wide receivers or 6 wide receivers. That was a tough spot for me to sort of sort through, and who maybe makes it and who doesn't. I've had, I think the secondary is an interesting spot because there's a lack of depth at the cornerback spot, but part of that could be too, maybe you keep 5 safeties and you keep 6 corners just in case. We'll see how I sort of mapped it out here, but I am going to start with the offense. By the way, this is with the concession of Dustin Hopkins, Corey Bojorquez, and Rex Sunahara being on this roster as 3 of the spots via your specialists in the special teams group. So that's the first 3 spots that are accounted for. Here is, I flashed the wrong one up here. Sorry about that. I have the offense for you here first. And as you can see, I do have the Browns keeping all 4 quarterbacks to start this thing off on when the roster gets cut down next Tuesday by 4 p.m. is the deadline to cut your roster down to 53 players. And so I have Flacco, I have Pickett, I have Gabriel, I have Sanders. Again, I just don't know if they're going to trade a guy that they traded, or they're not. I keep saying trade. If they traded him and got some sort of draft capital in return, I think it'd be fine. I don't know that they're just going to blindly cut Kenny Pickett without some sort of promise of something coming back to them after trading for him this offseason. And so I don't know if that's going to materialize here as quickly as they'd hope. And so for that reason, I do have them keeping Kenny Pickett, at least initially, on the 53-man roster, and then also keeping the 2 rookies sort of around behind him. I don't think either of those guys are going anywhere. So I do have them keeping 4 quarterbacks. Again, maybe just to start the 53-man roster window, where you get to 53 and then you lead up to week 1 and maybe some things change before week 1. But for now, I have them keeping all 4, and we'll see if that comes to fruition. That it's going to create some interesting conversations later down the roster, because if you're keeping 4 quarterbacks, that means you're keeping 1 less of something else. Running backs, I have 3, Jerome Ford, Dillon Sampson. Those 2 to me are locks. And then Amani, especially with Quinshon Judkins' situation still not resolved, Amani Marshall makes my 3rd spot. Pierre Strong Jr. obviously has the special teams prowess. But here's the thing. I think Amani Marshall has had just a better camp overall. I think he has stood out. I think he's done some nice things. He threw a really nice block for Shedeur in the first preseason game to help create that 2nd touchdown pass. He had a touchdown run last week over the weekend in the 2nd preseason game against the Eagles. I've been impressed by him. I think if they keep 3, he makes the cut. We'll see if they still feel strongly about Pierre Strong, though, instead. But this is the way I leaned in this projection. Wide receiver. Here's where things start to get interesting, because, as I said, you keep 4 quarterbacks, you got to find a place to cut somewhere else. And so for me, I only have them keeping 5 wide receivers for now. Now, this could be something that changes if you keep Kenny Pickett initially, and then you decide, then you find a trade partner for him. Maybe you trade him, and then that frees you up to add a 6 wide receiver at some point. We'll see. And they still could keep 6 wide receivers and maybe keep 20. This is 25 total players if you do the math. And I forgot to add my 3 next to the tight ends, I noticed. But this is 25 total players on offense. That means there's 25 total players on defensive once you count the specialists, and there's the initial 3 that I listed. And so if like there's a conversation to be had where maybe they do keep 26 players on offense and only 24 on defense, and that 26th player is a 6 wide receiver. It could be Deontay Johnson. It could be King Davis, who's had a pretty solid couple solid preseason games. Deontay Johnson, to me, though, is kind of right on the squarely on the chopping block at this point. I think these 5 on here are pretty much locks. Jerry Jeudy, Cedric Tillman, Jamari Thrash, Isaiah Bond are definitely locks. DeAndre Carter is the team's primary returner. DeAndre Carter is the team's primary returner, and I don't know that they view anybody else in that role right now, where I would have to assume they keep him. And then the 6th guy is maybe either Caden Davis or Deontay Johnson, who hasn't done himself any favors in recent weeks at the joint practices and also at training camp and in the preseason this last week or so. And so I have my questions about Deontay Johnson making this roster at this point, but he's kind of on the fringe there. He's had some good days at camp and some bad days at camp. We'll see what they decide to do. Tight ends, I'm keeping 3. This was another one I toiled over a little bit because with only keeping 5 receivers and playing a lot more 12 personnel, I wondered if maybe they keep 4 tight ends. But I'm going to say 3, David Njoku, Harold Fannin, Blake Whiteheart. And I think all 3 of those make sense. Harold Fannin kind of could serve as just your 6th wide receiver in general because they used him a ton last week during joint practices in the slot, running a lot of routes, getting very involved in the offensive game plan, running trick plays with him. So there's a lot to offer there from Harold Fannin Jr., and it'll be fascinating to see how he's deployed alongside David Njoku, without David Njoku, what the wide receiver situation looks like with him involved as well as kind of a pseudo wide receiver. So there's a lot to sort of behold there. And then we go to the offensive line, and I have them keeping 10 guys. Another position group that I was like, do I want them to keep 10? Do I not? And here's the thing, like, they've kept 9 in the past. I just think the history here of guys getting hurt, knowing that this is such a veteran group that has a tendency to potentially be more prone to injuries. Jack Conklin's had plenty. Joe Bitonio has dealt with a few bumps and bruises along the way. Ethan Posick and Wyatt Teller the last couple of years have had injuries, and DeJuan Jones obviously has had 2 injuries, 1 in each of his first 2 years. I think you want a solid group behind them that you can sort of depend on to come in and spell them if something goes awry or if somebody gets hurt. And so that means Cornelius Lucas, Tevin Jenkins, Luke Whippler, Zach Zinter, and Jackson Barton round out the other 5 in a group that you're keeping 10 total players. Maybe you keep another one if Cornelius Lucas's ankle injury is something more serious, something that's going to prohibit him from practicing or making the initial 53-man roster, or if he has to go on some sort of list to start things off. We will see. And I'm sure we'll ask Kevin Stefanski about that on Tuesday. But for now, this is the group that I have assembled in terms of the Browns offense that I think that they're going to keep here next week on roster cutdown day. It's 25 total players. Yes, it's the 4 quarterbacks. Do you agree with my projection? Or do you think 6 wide receivers is on the menu and Deontay Johnson or Caden Davis is the other? Here's the other thing, too, at that position. Gage Larvidan has absolutely earned the right to be in the conversation as a 6 wide receiver being kept. But I do think the Browns will try to get him to the practice squad. I think that's the ultimate goal there for him. I don't think it's going to be a cut and dry, just keep him on the 53-man roster. He's a little undersized. There's a reason why he was an undrafted rookie. He's had a brilliant camp, and for that reason, he probably deserves a spot over somebody like Deontay Johnson, for example. But I do think that their strategy will be, let's cut him, sneak him back onto the practice squad when there's all these other players out there that people can sort of pick up and choose from and try to bring in. And we hope that we can get him back here in some capacity. But I don't know if he makes the initial 53-man roster, so I'm leaving him off of it for now, even though he probably is one of the most deserving players to be on the 53-man roster, just given how great he's been throughout camp. That's the offense. What about the defense that I flashed up there too soon? We'll show you that, break it down for you next on the Locked On Browns podcast. Have you ever decided last minute to head to a ball game with friends and family? Maybe it's game day and suddenly you realize you just want to be in the stands. That's exactly where Gametime comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last minute tickets without the stress. With the money you save on tickets, you can splurge on food, drinks, merch, even invite a bigger group to come with you. Gametime makes it all possible. Gametime makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices in the app actually drop as you get closer to first pitch. And they've got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and the lowest prices guaranteed. That takes the worry out of buying. Last year, I used Gametime for the first time. I bought tickets for my wife and I to go see Ohio State, Michigan. Obviously, we were disappointed in the results, but we get to say we saw the eventual national champs in person. And with their transparent ticket pricing and panoramic seat views, Gametime has now become my go-to app for buying tickets. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply again. Just create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, guaranteed. All right, so that was the offensive projection on my latest 53. And I will do this exercise one more time next week, by the way. Probably on Monday, leading into Tuesday's cut down day, which is at 4 p.m. yet again. And so we have 25 spots to still fill based on my projection. With what I gave you on the offensive side, I had 25 guys being kept. Now we go to the defensive side, which means we'll keep 25 guys on that side of the ball as well. And I did sort of spoil things a little bit here if you were watching, if you're a part of the viewing audience. I flashed this one up a little too early, but I have to start us off the defensive ends, and I have 5 of those being kept. Myles Garrett, Alex Wright, Isaiah McGuire, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, and Cameron Thomas, who I think has flashed at times this camp. There's an argument to be made for a couple of other guys in this group that maybe could be the 5th or even a 6th guy if they wanted to keep an extra one on in that position group specifically. I kind of went about it in a way where I was like, listen, this is already a strong room regardless. Like Julian Okwara, for example, could be a guy that sticks around in that group. KJ Henry, I think's had a pretty strong camp as well. So there's some options there for the 5th or 6th guy if they wanted to keep 6, which I just think is a little too much. For a group that already they view as deep and strong as is, I don't know that they need to keep a 6th guy in that group. And that's why I ultimately went away from keeping a 6th guy. Defensive tackle is interesting because they're only keeping 4 for now. And there has been a tendency from this Browns team to keep about 9 guys on the defensive line in general anyway over the years with Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry. So I thought these 4 make sense. Malik Collins, Mason Graham, Shelby Harris, Sam Kamara. Now, if you're wondering where Mike Hall is, I am assuming at this point Mike Hall is going to be on the PUP list to start the season. He hasn't practiced once, isn't back with the team yet, unless we get some grand announcement on Tuesday that he's suddenly practicing. I just don't know that they're going to have him active on the 53-man roster. So I'm sort of slotting him in as a PUP list guy, and he'll eventually join this group, and maybe you got to cut somebody to make room. But for now, I think those 4, Collins, Graham, Harris, Kamara, are all your defensive tackle guys on this roster. Linebacker room sort of takes care of itself here. With Jordan Hicks retiring, it became sort of self-explanatory. Carson Schlesinger, obviously, going to be a focal point of this defense without question as a rookie. Handle that green dot. He's been doing a phenomenal job during camp. He's really stood out. So he starts it off. Devin Bush, Jerome Baker, Mahmoud Diabate, and I have Winston Reed as the 5th guy. But you can make the case for Nathaniel Watson. He's very involved in special teams, has done a nice job during camp, had that fumble recovery in the Panthers game that set up the touchdown that Shedeur Sanders threw. So there's a case he made for either of those guys being the 5th guy, but I think this group as a whole, pretty self-explanatory. And I think those are the guys that make it. The cornerback room is interesting because I've talked about this already. The idea that the Browns don't have a lot of depth at the cornerback positions based off of now given the injury to Martin Emerson Jr., which is obviously problematic. Denzel Ward and Greg Newsome obviously making this roster. They are locks as the starters on this team. But behind them, I don't have a lot of confidence in the guys filling in the nickel spot. Cameron Mitchell's tried to do it, but he's also had an up and down camp. There's been some good moments. There's been some bad moments. I think you saw that in the Eagles game. He gave it that touchdown on the slant route. Not one of his best plays. And so I think he makes the roster, but I don't know that you feel a lot of confidence with him in general. I think Chigozie Anuzium makes the roster. I got Tony Brown making it for special teams reasons. And I still got Miles Harden making this team as the 6th guy because Andrew Berry drafted him. I just wonder if because they don't have a lot of depth in terms of talent, they keep more of them so they have more options to turn to when it's all said and done at this spot. and they can just kind of rotate different guys in and out and do some different things. That was my guess. But obviously, like, they could keep 5 and 5 safeties, which is what I have here. I'll get to the safeties here in a second, and then keep that 6 receiver, or keep 5 and 5 safeties and maybe keep an extra defensive tackle or something like that, or another defensive end. Who knows? So there's some options if they don't keep 6, but I kind of just felt like out of necessity, they did it this way on my latest projection. And then the safeties, like I said, 5 of them being kept. I got Grant Delpit, Ronnie Hickman, Christopher Edmonds, who's had a lot of run with the ones I've noticed to practice, DeMonte Casey, Rayshon Jenkins, all make the cut. And part of the reason you keep 5 safeties along with the 6 corners is if they're not going to have a nickel corner that they really feel like they can rely on, well, this gives you the option to do the 3 safety look that they like to run a lot, where they put a guy down in the box and they have 2 guys back and they sort of go from there. So I'm just kind of trying to maximize the options you have in the secondary here, and that's why I went with 11 total secondary guys. But I could be way off on that. We'll have to see how it all plays out. They could end up still keeping the 6 wide receivers, and maybe it's Deontay Johnson. Maybe it's Gage Larvadan doing enough to earn that last spot. But it creates this interesting scenario just in general where these are the things we're going to be watching over the course of the next week or so. Guys in the back end of the roster fighting for jobs. Who makes it? Who doesn't? What does the final roster sort of look like? Cut down day a week from today, 4 p.m. next Tuesday. And we'll know exactly what the 53-man roster is going to look like, at least leading up to week 1, subject to change. Those things always seem to change pretty abruptly once guys clear waivers and all those things kind of happen. So we'll see what it looks like. But that's what this last week is about. Of course, the 4 quarterbacks and whether or not that becomes a thing and they actually do keep 4, and what the rest of the roster as they fill it out looks like sort of all the way through. Do you agree with my 53-man roster projection? Who do you think stays? Who do you think goes? Do they keep 6 wide receivers? Do they keep 4 quarterbacks? You can let me know all your thoughts at SpenceC2_. And of course, in the comment section at the Locked On Browns YouTube channel. I appreciate you making us your first listen every day. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. And for your second listen, check out Locked On Bets, where betting experts Lee Sterling and Kevin Rogers have daily MLB locks and can't miss football futures. Or, as always, you can keep it local. Check out Locked On Cavs or Locked On Guardians. Thank you for being every day at the Locked On Podcast Network. I will talk to you again real soon, Cleveland. See ya.